say a special thank you to Brother Holloway for bringing us special music this morning. God has been good to us all week, and to be reminded of His goodness again today is a special thing. We have been attentive to families for the past month, and we took a little detour from our original sequence to be attentive to the issue of health, because this Sabbath we are focusing on health as a church family. And so I thought it might be good for me to just digress a little bit, not too far from the focus, but a little from where I originally planned for us to be today. Next Sabbath, we will continue with the direct. We will be talking next Sabbath about what parents and heads of households need to achieve in successful child training. What parents and heads of household need to achieve in successful child training. That's what we'll be looking at next week. Today we just want to focus on God's attentiveness to health in the functioning of families. If you will turn with me, please, to the book of Numbers, chapter 11. Book of Numbers, chapter 11. And I'll be glad if you can follow me there as we read from verse 4. Numbers chapter 11, beginning at verse 4. It says, "Now the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense cravings, so the children of Israel also wept again and said, 'Who will give us meat to eat?' We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic." I love the garlic. I fuss with my wife every time I taste garlic in the food. She said, "You eat it so much you don't know it's there." And so I can see the fight on garlic. Stand the smell of garlic. But they loved garlic. But now our whole being is dried up. There is nothing at all except this manna before our eyes. Manna. It's interesting that when God gave them food, when God provided food on this wilderness journey, He gave them manna and not meat. Something about that. And I'm going to read now. It says, verse 7 says, "Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its color like the color of bdellium. The people went about and gathered it, ground it on millstones, or beat it in the mortar, cooked it in the pans, and made cakes of it. And its taste was like the taste of pastry prepared with oil. And when the dew fell on the camp in the night, the manna fell on it." This is how they got food. They complained. They had a craving. And they said, "This manna, we don't like. We want the things we had back in Egypt." And so I'm going to go right down to verse 31. Verse 31. They cried, and the intervening verses are real interesting reading. Take time. Not as a bedtime story when you're sleepy, but just to read how they fussed. Now a wind went out. The Lord said, "I'm going to send them meat." That's really what happened in between. They had a prayer session, men prophesied, two guys from inside the camp prophesied, folks come out to tell Moses, the men prophesying in the camp. Moses said, that's okay, that's okay. And God said, I'm going to send them meat. Now a wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea, and left them fluttering near the camp, about a day's journey on this side and about the day's journey on the other side. In other words, it's all around them. You go one day's journey in any direction, and there's quail fluttering. Meat. And about 2 cubits above the surface of the earth, that's about 3.5 feet. I think I checked the translation somewhere. And the people stayed up all that day and all that night and all the next day, and they gathered quail. He who gathered least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. And while the meat was still between their teeth, before it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was aroused against the people. And the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. So he called the name of the place Kibroth Hatava, because there they buried the people who had yielded to cravings. Kibroth Hatava means graves of lust. Graves of lust. O God of heaven, we invite your presence now with us as we reflect on your word. We thank you for being with us this morning, right here in San Bernardino. There is Ricky White and her family circle. We ask your blessings upon them. We ask your blessing upon every family represented here, your blessings upon every family of this church, and grant us a deeper connection to you, a closer walk with you. In Jesus' name, amen. And so Moses heard the people, and he cried out to God. Here was a manifestation of a dissatisfied spirit which caused displeasure with God. With these people, these Israelites and the mixed multitude, I'll just make passing reference to them later on, the mixed multitude. They were worse than grumbling children who had everything but still complained about what they did not have. This murmuring negatively reflects on God's goodness, his wisdom, his truth, his power. They had an evil lusting which had them queued backwards to Egypt. They were delivered from Egypt. And though they were delivered from Egypt, they had this cravings for the things they left back in Egypt. And the craving was so strong that they wanted not just what they left back in Egypt, but they wanted to go back to Egypt. That's what we had. The evil lusting which attended these complaining saints was injurious to their character. Sometimes we are exposing ourselves to more danger than we think when we start quarreling with God. And so God's anger burnt against them. The people set an imaginary value on something they did not have. That's probably what happens to a lot of us in our society today. We set a value on things we do not have. There are people in our society, real elegant researchers, technical investigators. They spend their time developing strategies to increase our appetite for things we do not need. That's what they spend their time doing. They research. And they do good work at that. We see the evidence in the behavior of our nation. These people set an imaginary value on something they did not have. Not only is this attitude foolish, but it prevents us from enjoying what we already have. It is an attitude of ingratitude to God and leads to rebellion. It leads to falsehoods and all manner of evils. More than this dissatisfied spirit is not even pleased when it is fulfilled. That's the nature of this insatiable thing. That's, in fact, the word that is used when it says, "Thou shalt not covet." What is covetous? To covet can be a neutral word. Yes, it's somewhere you would have remembered reading, covet the best gifts, for example. A desire for something that is good is a positive use of the word or the meaning covet. The word covet is used in the Bible in many different ways, multiple meanings. There's a sense in which covetous is altogether good or right. That is, for us to have a desire for the best gift, covetous. It's an insatiable desire. And that insatiable desire can be for something that is evil. So he said, do not covet thy neighbor's house, his wife. That's what it's covetous. The Buddhists, I read where Clovis Gilham Chappell said, the Buddhists believe that heaven is the cessation of all desires. The Buddhists. You hear about a Buddhist monk and you see monks and you see people, and this happened in the Middle Ages a lot. They would move themselves away from society. They want no pleasure at all from society. Nothing that is pleasurable should one aspire from. Hearing the screaming still from the microphone. And Clovis Chappell said, to be free of all desires only happens in the cemetery. It's only when you're dead you're free of all desires. So what he was attempting to say there is that such a state is, the Buddha said, such a state is heaven, to be free of all desires. And Clovis said, Chappell said, that's not heaven. That's a cemetery. There are certain things we have a perfect right to desire with earnestness. Covetousness is the inordinate desire for something that is not yours. I do not like the word covetous, so I'll stick with the inordinate desire for everything. If you read Genesis chapter 3 and verse 6, you will notice an interesting thing. You'll notice it says there, and you can just turn with me, please, just to, to keep your hands, your fingers moving. You got those electronic devices. You can find the text really easy. I am still old school. I like the book and page. You know, I'm one of the students a school would make money on still selling textbooks. So it says here, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, she saw that the tree was good for food, the visual motivation. And it was pleasant to the eyes. How does she know it was pleasant? She's cued into something because she hasn't tasted it as yet. She saw that it was desirable for food. To make one wise, she took it and ate it. And then she gave to her husband, and he ate it. The thing that happened with the children of Israel and the mixed multitude is a magnification, or maybe not a magnification. It is the same thing that happened to Eve in the Garden of Eden. An insatiable desire for something. Where is he going with this? We are in the same general situation as a society. Catherine Flagel, senior researcher from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, found something in the early 90s that was very interesting. Trained researcher. And she looked at some information, data gathered from Americans. And over previous decades, Americans, way before that, Americans typically would gain a couple of pounds between the ages of 20 and 40, 2 pounds or so. And then they will lose a couple of pounds in their 60s and 70s. This is the phenomenon this researcher is observing. Then from government surveys and data collected from 1988 to 1991, research revealed that 1/3 of the population aged 20 to 74 weighed too much. All of a sudden, they noticed something dramatically different happening with the population. Weight. In fewer than a dozen years, 8% of the population had crossed over the ranks of the into the ranks of the overweight. She's doing this research. And they're looking at these decade data, 50s, 60s, 60s, 70s, 70s, 80s, 80s, 90s. And all of a sudden there's a dramatic difference in the weight gain of Americans. In 1994, and she looked at this and she said to people, they asked their students, let's look at this again. Let's take another look at this data. Crystal does that thing a lot. Look at the data and then, oh, this doesn't make sense. Let's look at it again. Run another statistical analysis. They watched the weight gain. And in 1994, she published in the American Medical Journal, published a comparison of current and earlier data on the weight of Americans, and notice that across the board, among men and women, black and white, the rate of obesity, young and old, the rate of obesity had exploded. 1960s, 20 to 29-year-old people, women, average weight 128. 2000, average weight 128 pounds, I should rather say. In this data that they published, for that period that we are talking about, the 1994, the 80s and beyond, the average weight moved to 157, from 128 to 157 pounds. Years 40 to 49. For the earlier period, the 60s, 142 pounds. After that, 160 pounds. Men, don't think men are excused. Men began entering adulthood at a higher weight. When before, between the age of 20 to 40, they would gain a couple of pounds, they were gaining an average of 12 pounds during this later period. I went home, I should tell you, I went home. Dr. Modest was presenting something for us at the, when we had the program last year, and she was talking about women's health. And she gave these nice little statistics about, based on the height and, and so on and so forth of women, they should have such and such a weight. So I ran home and I gave my wife the information. She wasn't, in my opinion, she wasn't particularly pleased. So she shouted back at me. She said, well, what did Dr. Mother say about the men's weight? I said, she wasn't talking about men. It was women she was talking about. I don't have the information about the men. So what was responsible for the increased weight? They started to look. And by the way, let's be clear. I went to my doctor. I do my annual physical some years ago, quite a few years ago. I was still in Boston. I went to him one year, and he said, he's doing all the thing. They're pretty sophisticated. And he said, you gained 2 pounds. That's from year to year. So I'm not paying him too much attention. And so I kind of brushed him off. I said, well, it's just 2 pounds, doc. He turned to me and he said, I can't have you gaining 2 pounds every year going forward. So I thought about it, and maybe he's onto something. If I gained 2 pounds last year to now, and I gained 2 more pounds this year to next year, that means I'm going to be 4 pounds heavier than the year before. That's what I'm thinking. He caught my attention. I said, this guy's probably onto something. I didn't acknowledge as much as I should have to him, but I thought he was making a good point to me. So that's important for us to be attentive to. And so they came up with a few things. They observed. Hear me, please. They observed a few things. What happened? Food became more readily available in the 70s and 80s. That's one of the things they noticed. That's why we were getting heavier. Food became more readily available in the 80s and 90s. The availability of food was indicative of a particular fact, and that is food which was becoming more available was also more processed food. And I heard Dr. David Kessler, I heard him in an interview, and then I read his book. He made the point, he said, the processed food, he said, little babies, you have to, this is how we illustrate it. And I'm leaving the science of the nutrition to Stella and the others. They're good with that thing. I'm not after that today. That detail I'm not particularly interested in. I'm interested in see if we can get some points that we can go tell others even if we are not guilty of. He said the food, the baby food, and the Gerber thing and so on we used to buy for the kids. He said that's food is processed in a certain way. And it is necessary for the babies. That's how he explained it. He's a medical doctor. He ought to know what he's talking about. And if I'm misquoting him, I might be. But so what? But he said the processed food for adults is not healthy food. Because he said, now you have left out so much of the essentials of the food. That's the bulk, Dr. Keith, help me, Trump. Does that sound like it? Yes, the bulk, the roughage. That's what they taught me in biology class, the roughage. Is that right? That's the thing that goes through there that's supposed to help clean out the intestines. That's what's happening. So we don't have that in the food so much anymore. That's the point they are making. Availability of food, availability of more processed food. Now the processed food, it had some advantages that you can get the food to the market, it can stay on the shelf for a long time and so on and so forth, but the food is processed food. And so that was the second danger. Between this morning to now, I have already consumed about 8 glasses of water. No, this is not anything to brag about because there are many things I don't do right. But I'm trying to make one point and one point only. You know what is the number 1 selling over-the-counter drug in the United States of America? Laxatives. What's another word for laxatives? What's a word that people understand easier? Things like milk of magnesia and those kinds of things too. The very people who buy those things wouldn't turn on the tap and drink water. And if they would just drink water in appropriate quantities, they would be able to do without wasting their money on that foolishness. Am I making any sense to you? Come on, help me through this. The next thing that they said, notice, there were more, so we have food became more readily available. With the food becoming more available, there was also, in combination with that, more processed food. And then larger portion sizes. We began to eat larger portion sizes. Now, I don't want to pick on anybody but portion sizes. But I remember when we were teenagers, we used to eat a lot. We used to eat a lot. We love eating. As a matter of fact, we used to brag about how much we can eat as teenagers. Larger portion sizes. And then the next thing that happened, we had more chain restaurants and more neighborhood food outlets available. And then you'll see why I talk my teenage years now. More chain restaurants, more food outlets. You drive along any one of these streets, there are all kinds of little food places. Some of them I never saw the names before. I drive along D Street, D Street yesterday, and so what some of these names are coming from? Fancy restaurants. You drive by, you smell the stuff. More neighborhood food outlets and a culture that promotes more out-of-home eating. So here is where the teenage bragging, we used to brag about how we eat. But I noticed something. When we ate what we used to call breakfast, the first meal of the day, we didn't eat again until lunchtime. Nowadays, people are just eating all the time. People just eat. They just drop the, we're a culture of eating little programs. You notice in our society, everything they have, whatever program they have, the food industry gets real fussy when they start to cut the tax benefits for organizations who buy food for their programs. Everything folks have to eat. And some of the places where I go to school and when I have to, and some of the places I have to be at and so on, they always have food, and then some people bring food and you're going to eat, and I always have my excuse, oh, you all can't feed me, I'm vegetarian, so I have that one excuse, and they say, no, this is not vegetarian, and I just heard them talking about how many cats they had at home, and they want me to eat that food. I don't eat it. I find some reason, I come up with something to get away. I don't eat too much. My wife is one of the best cooks I've ever encountered. Yeah, that's it. So when she cooked, and some of y'all here I know cook, so I know who to eat from. The moment somebody says, I got 4 dogs and 3 cats, don't cook for me. It's just the culture of eating everything people are eating. You see where I'm going with this? So stay with me. So, please. The point we're trying to get at here is, I am trying to get at here is, the Israelites, Eve, they were consumed with desire. Desire can be for anything. Today I'm focusing on desire for food. That's what I'm focusing on. Desire can be for anything. And so, Dr. Elliot Kessler helped me through this. He said, you walk into any supermarket, what is happening here? What causes us to develop this craving? As a result of all of these things, we becoming an obese nation. What's beneath this? And I just want to spend some time looking at this a little bit. Walk into an American supermarket. Bread, crackers, chocolate. People and animals eat excessively. Our typical supermarket diet. That's what he observed. David Kessler, excuse me. The diet stimulates us, he said, secondly, the diet stimulates us to eat more, to want more and more of it. And then he explains why. Stay with me here, Claude. Stay with me. Stay with me. The diet, something in the diet stimulates us to want more and more of it. What is it? The fat, he said, the sugar, and the salt. So you add sugar, people are stimulated more. But then when you add the salt and the fat to the sugar, you start to get exponential stimulating power. And so people want to eat more and more of it. And so he says, when offered, they run experiments with animals and show this, and with human beings also. When offered varied selections and larger portions of higher sugars, high salt, high fat, many people will eat them in excessive amounts. That's what they said. Now, I was doing this work this week, and it occurs to me, why is it that they serve dessert when everybody has already eaten everything they want to eat? And people still want the dessert. I'm just asking the question, I don't know an answer. I'm taking some of what he's saying. But you must notice, and again I said, this is not about anything else. Well, I'll talk about it later on. But it's one of the reasons I refuse dessert. I don't want anything sweet. Now I'm finished eating. I don't want anything more. As a general rule, don't feel I'm insulted if you pass the dessert plate by me. I am not. Go with it. Let somebody else try with it. So he says, that's what it is. So first of all, we eat weight-increasing food. Secondly, the diet is stimulating because of the sugar, the salt, and the fats. The unifying fine feature of all drugs of addiction, opioids are responsible for pleasure. But he makes an interesting point, and he observed, he worked with a researcher in Italy, and they observe that the dopamine kind of gates our attention. You know, heroin, cocaine, morphine, these things stimulate the dopamine centers of the brain. So an individual who starts using them, the attention gets focused on these things. After a number of times of eating does the same, food does the same thing. It stimulates the dopamine centers of the brain. It elevates brain dopamine. They tried it with animals. They feed them the fats and the sugars over long periods of time. And they noticed that no matter how much you feed them, if you make available the food again, the sugars, that dopamine in the brain is elevated again. So it's like a drug addicting effect the food has on people. He tells a story, and some of you may have seen the show on the Oprah Winfrey Show, how a woman came up there with the Dr. Phil. That was way back when Oprah was the queen of television, open television. And she said this lady came up from the audience talking with Dr. Phil, and she said, I feel as if I always want to eat. I am eating, but I also feel as if I always want to eat. It's not the eating is the issue. It's the desire that she has almost an insatiable appetite for food. And so this hard time resisting, favorite things, foods. 70 million Americans with this conditioned driven behavior. The three things which describe that behavior. Number one, the loss of control. Hard time stopping, that lack of control. The lack of satiation, that is, people eat and they're not satisfied with the food. And then the preoccupation with the food. So the loss of control, the lack of satiation, and the preoccupation with the food. Power of the food comes from the cues about it. This is the final observation here. The power of the food comes from the cues about the supermarket. So folks walk in and all these things, they flash them at us. And we are bombarded with the signals and we cue. Now the cue means that we have a memory about this thing. The cue is trained, or trains our memory, and our memory allows the cue to activate in us. Because we see it, there is this excessive activation of the brain, the amygdala, the emotional core of the brain. When they are given the food to eat, the brain stays activated until the food is gone. There's a biological reason why people stay activated until the food is gone. It is almost automatic behavior. So I'm asking us now to be much more sensitive to people. We think the overeating, they just lack self-control. That might be part of it. But I'm trying to say we have become conditioned. We have gotten to the place where it's almost automatic behavior to eat the food that we love, and the foods that we love have been prepared to motivate us to want them because of the fats, because of the sugars, and because of the salt in the food. Our taste have become conditioned. We want more and more of the foods which are popularly available in our society. That's what's happening. And so we are there. We're living in a society. We're living in an environment in which we are prompted to eat. And people are training their children within that environment. We used to be driving on the highway. Our kids were little teeny weeny ones. This one wasn't long yet. And we used to be driving, and every time the little golden arch shop, that's when they want to go to the bathroom. We're driving on the highway, and I'm always hurrying on the highway, and we're on vacation, whatever. They want to pee. That's when they want to pee. We see McDonald's arch. That's when they want. You follow what's going on? The neural circuits are being created. And that's what's happening to us. An insatiable desire. It's the same thing that happened to Eve. It's the same thing that happened to the children of Israel as they were traveling through the wilderness. They were cued back to Egypt. They wanted what was there. They wanted the meat. They wanted the leeks. They wanted the cucumbers. It was an almost automatic reaction as a result of the conditioning over the years. Are you with me still? And so that's how this happened. And so we are living in a society in which the same thing. Now let me be very clear. Sometimes we think, and what he showed, what his research showed, Dr. Kessler made reference to research. It's not about, some of us are genetically prepared. If we just eat nothing, we can gain weight. And some of us can eat anything and we don't gain weight. You with me? So it's not about physical size now. I am speaking about the habituation, the conditioning of America. That's what I'm speaking about, of our society. And this has something important to do with how families function. Because, and you can question the medical people here when we're done, there are many medical conditions that are directly linked to our eating habits and eating patterns. I can't talk nonsense about that in this house because too many people are schooled in this field. So it's important for us to recognize that. We can talk about the hypertension and the metabolic syndrome. We can talk about many of those things, and we can start seeing food, or the way we eat, I should rather say, is important. So the great American economy make food available in socially acceptable ways, portion sizes. We walk down the street, we eat between meals, we eat all the time. And so nicotine, for example, is a casually addicting drug. But what they did with it, they packaged it. They placed fancy wrappers. They gave it a sex appeal. You've come a long way, baby. The fancy camel. Folks, the macho image. And then it became extremely addictive. You take a pound of sugar and say, go enjoy yourself. And you'll think I'm crazy. But then they package it with fats and salt. And they gave it the glamour, the texture and color. And say, you go do this with your friends. They put the sexiness in it. Yogurt. All of a sudden, yogurt has sex appeal. Yogurt. I heard the people who know talk about yogurt. A lot of us are deluded into thinking, oh, this is some healthy stuff. You're wasting your money. That's all it is. And it has become, the food now has become addictive. That we can constantly cue ourselves with. How do we stop? How do we stop becomes the question. And the critical perceptual shift. Just let me show you something here. David Kessler, the reason I was attracted to his book is because I liked his philosophy of medicine. When he was in charge, commissioner of the FDA, he fought. He's both an attorney and a medical doctor while he worked there. He fought the tobacco industry to the hilt. He fought them until eventually they got major sanctions against the tobacco industry. It started to use a term that is popular now. It started to break the fever, the connection of tobacco to the society. It started to break that. They can't advertise near to schools, etc., etc. And so what he is observing is that the addiction pattern that was responsible for the nation's, that is responsible for the nation's addiction to tobacco, legal drug, alcohol, legal drug. We kill hundreds of thousands of people per year with these drugs. We call them legal drugs. Well, I don't know if we call them drugs, and we call them the alcohol, we call it beverages. Now they got smokeless tobacco and electric tobacco. We're looking for ways, and people are gullible going after it. We can't break from these things. The addiction. And so he showed the patterns are similar with food and how food is packaged. I read where he said, one person said, the food industry, one of its main objectives is to make Americans addicted to their food. paraphrasing. That's the main objective. What shall we do? And so we need to start thinking this through. Now, what shall we then do? We need to start thinking about food differently. Look at the plate of fries and say, we typically say, I want that. The emotional core is activated. That's a difficult place to be. That's a difficult place to be. Fries. Years ago, I used to think fries, it's just some potato. And then I read where a guy said, you drop a fry in your car, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, you go back. No, it doesn't even get melt. McDonald's fries. Doesn't even, you can just blow it and yeah, you can blow it and eat it. That's good. So something is wrong with that. Normal food, regular potato, will deteriorate. It's get melted. Something's going to go wrong with it. They wouldn't tell what is the preservative they're using on the potato. And we go eat that. I was out with my daughter, these little rubbery things that people chew, gummy something. And a lady helped me out. The lady said, you know how long that thing takes to get digested in your body? She see my daughter, my daughter always talks some junk, always some. The lady, I can't remember exactly how the lady framed it, but what the lady essentially said was, some of it never gets digested. After a certain number of days, you might. So you understand the point. So the thing here is, we need to start taking the same attitude to food that we did to tobacco. You have to decide whether you want something else for yourself. We have to start our own re-education. Is it something that you care about? To lay down a new learning pattern within the brain to become, is this thing important? The polyprocessed food, we have to look at and decide that something about this is disgusting. I know some of you here, you pass through places where people are smoking and you get upset. Loma Linda University and some places that I know, I went to Kaiser to visit somebody some time ago, and you can't even smoke. They don't want you to smoke even on their parking lot. I thought that's good. That's good. At the time when I saw that at Kaiser, they didn't have that ruling at Loma Linda. I hope they have that ruling at Loma Linda now. But that to me is good. You want to smoke someplace far and by ear. So we're developing a hostile attitude towards the smoking. And so we're saying here, we need to be able to deal also with the cues. That is becoming very important in our own lives. And so process the food. We have to be careful about how we say we want everything. I have to tell you sometimes, I have to tell you this, and I know some of you would be upset with me for saying this, but what I've talked nonsense before. What if I talk sense and you're forgiving me for that? So if I talk sense, you will forgive me easier. Some of our church lunches on Sabbath days are some of the places of the greatest overeating and poor diet practicing that some of us do for a long time. I've gone to, I'm not here necessarily, don't misunderstand me. I've gone some places, I'm saying, what on earth is this? And sometimes I was at a place once and they brought this little red Kool-Aid drink, and there was a lady there, she was quite a kind of almost fanatic about health. She said, And she started all kinds of fuss about them drinking this Kool-Aid and so on. And so she turns to me. I'm caught in the midst of this because I'm seeing the people trying to do their little dinner. And so she turns to me, she said, Pastor, do you drink that Kool-Aid? I said, oh, give me a little bit of it. Let me just trace. I drank some of it. I said, Kool-Aid, I don't drink Kool-Aid at home. So what happens if I drink some Kool-Aid on Sabbath? It doesn't matter to me. But the point I'm making is, these are the things folks eat, and they eat, and they eat, and then they have dessert, and then they can't go out and do missionary work. The dinners. And some of us who are more affluent, like here, we're affluent so we can buy plenty fancy dinners. Well, we used to. So that's how it is. So the thing is, to change, we need to look at food differently. And here, just now you thought it's easy for me to just just get up one day and say, I don't want the dessert. No. Here what happened. I decided to myself, I have to start resisting some things. And I have to pick on the things which I think are not helpful to my body. So that's why I said. So ice cream to me, I cannot, you can't, you have to argue real hard to convince me that ice cream has any particular nutritional value to my body. So, you have to really come up with an argument to come and persuade me about that. My point is not to your body, my body. Don't get mixed up with this. Anybody can use anything they want in moderation to whatever extent. I am saying I decided there's some things I'm just going to try to keep out almost completely. And so I pick on some. And so that's my resistance. That's my resistance. You're looking at me with funny eyes, because you want to with your little ice cream. Why you think this whole cue and these motivationalist neurocircuits, why you think some of you hear from certain places of the world, the moment you hear curry goat, you start salivating? Why you think? You can't help yourself. And so I am not prepared to comment on the nutritional value of the curry goat. That's not my point here. My point is simply this. Please understand what is happening to people. That's what I'm trying to say. Please understand what is happening to people. And if it means that you have to check that yourself, you need to check that ourselves. We need to check that ourselves. I have gone to some places, guys, I went to one place, one guy came and he preached. I thought he preached a glorious sermon. He talked about the effects of some of these products that we like to use, and some people from some parts of the world, they were livid when the service was over. So I'm sitting, I was not the preacher, I was the home pastor. So I said, well, what did he do? He preached against such and such and such. I said, well, what did he say that was wrong? He didn't say anything that was wrong, but I didn't like how he said it. Folks get upset. Food. You don't mess with Americans' food. You're going to have problems with people you start messing with their food. And so what I'm trying to say is now we need to start thinking about how we deal with food. And that which we thought was all right, we maybe need to start rethinking, maybe I need to back away from this a little bit, just maybe. That's all I'm saying. And start working on that. Then we need to have. So what shall we do then? We have to want to do something about our food if we feel if we feel we have patterns which are not helpful. We have to start our own re-education. If this is something that we care about, we need to start trying to lay down new learning patterns within the brain. We need to have a substitute, reward, mindfulness, and increase awareness of what else can we use. We need to be able to deal with the cues, and that is very important. Most overeating happens between the hours of 5 p.m. and bedtime. That's when they discover most overeating happens. And hear what they say. People get home now, they're relaxed. They just took care of the children, send them to bed. Now we're free. We can watch TV and we can eat. That's what happens. I heard that some time ago, and I started to think, what can I do to refrain from eating after 5? Now, some days I get up and I run out, so I'm not trying to make myself better than anybody else here. Some days I get up and I run out, and I didn't eat the morning. And then I get going, and I don't take lunch. And then I get home, I'm hungry. It's after 5. So now, what I need to do is to plan my day differently. That's what I'm trying to say. And if I could only get the discipline to do that, or get it into my program of planning my day, I might do much better than that. That's what I'm trying to convey here. Because I find if I go home and I've eaten properly earlier the day, and I feel hungry, a good drink of water just makes everything go away. The feeling of hunger. And so that's another thing. Sometimes people get frustrated, they get angry, they get upset and so on. They're frustrated and they start eating. This is really documented in the literature. And so people have to start working on that also. To be able to identify the emotions. What's happening? I'm angry. I'm upset. I'm frustrated. And then ask the question, when has anybody been helped by eating because he or she was angry? Typically doesn't work. Now, if you're hungry, then you eat. So the point is now to find alternative ways to deal with the emotions. That's what we're trying to do. And part of what we need to do is to work on this with our children while they're still young. This thing we need to start working on. The neural circuits must get laid down in our children while they're still young. A lot of parents do an interesting thing. They like to reward their children with food. I was out one day, and I'm trying, this lady, she packed a good-sized plate for her almost 6-year-old son at the time. And I'm trying to engage her because I'm saying, I'm seeing this thing. The guy had eaten enough and he doesn't want more food. And she's there. She said, when I pack his food, he's got to eat everything before he gets up from the table. The clean plate strategy, that's how we call it in psychology. Sometimes the child had enough. And to teach a 5-year-old that you must eat everything we put on the table for you is a bad teaching lesson. Because you don't want any child to learn that whatever is served him or her, he or she should eat all of it. That's a bad place. I've been trying to teach my daughter not to do that for a long time now. And my rate of success I'll leave out for this discussion. But the point I'm trying to make here is that's not a good lesson to teach. Am I making sense here? Just important for us to get to that. What happened? What happened? So now, the children, our environment, we said, is triggering some of these behaviors, so we need to watch our environment. We need to eat with structure, that is, not between meals. Everything that they see, they want, and you give them, We can't practice that before children. We can't teach them that. Eat with structure. And one of the things I think is important, very practical, is more of us need to learn to cook. Men, I'm talking about the men in particular. If any of the young ladies here qualify, then God bless their souls. But this is the men. We need to learn to cook. My wife thinks, and I think my children, they think I'm stingy about food because I don't like going out and buying food. You go to McDonald's, you can get any good meal at McDonald's for less than $8. If you get a decent one, you spend $10. You know, here's how I'm thinking. Here's how I messed up myself. You know how much food that $10 could put on my table. That's what I'm thinking. You know how much lentil I could buy? You know how much black-eyed peas, how much whatever, how much of the legumes I can buy with that and have to spare, etc. So you see the point we're making here. So to me, learning to cook is a good thing. Before I go out and before I buy something, go home and cook. That's how I think I'm saving the 2 pennies that I have, because God knows the 2 pennies that I have are running out real quick before the month ends, before the money. The money ends before the month, and so I need something to stretch there. So some of these social norms we need to be watchful of. What happened to the children of Israel? By what? The Bible says here in Genesis chapter 3 and in Numbers chapter 11, the people were influenced by the literal word is the riffraff, the mob. We don't know where they came from. We just know they came from Egypt. They were not indigenous Hebrews. So I'm saying, first of all, in summation of the day, we need to be careful about by what we are influenced, what people, what places, what things, and motivations. What are we influenced by? The people around us, sometimes we allow ourselves to be influenced by. The places we go, the things we do. Influence. The Israelites were influenced by the mob. Imagine us these days. All of a sudden, the diet of society, we have a greater love for society's diet than the biblical diet. You go around this country, some people have no interest in religion. No, they have no particular interest in religion, but they're vegetarians. I have said to some, I don't know about this whole vegetarian stuff to advocate to people who don't care about what Jesus teaches. Because to me, it makes them live longer to do more evil. Hitler was a vegetarian. But when you mix the diet in a godly context and live the life combined with the diet, then we are on to something. So be careful what things influence us. The people, the places, the motivations. We need to be careful. The Israelites were not careful, and they were driven. Secondly, we need to recognize that every satisfied desire, or let me put it this way, satisfied desires do not always bring God's blessings. God said, I'm going to satisfy the desire for meat. Satisfied desires do not always bring God's blessings. When we are dealing with food and these substances, be careful. The satisfied desire is not necessarily going to be a blessing from God. If we have the loss of control, the lack of satiation, the preoccupation with the food, understand that's the pattern that the drug addicts work with. Sometimes people get all upset with drug addicts. I'm going to talk about that in a few weeks. What's happening to them, they themselves do not understand sometimes. Because when they get in the context, and this is interesting enough, this is part of the reason why some of our drug rehab programs are so difficult to maintain success. Because when we take the people out from the environment and they come to the hospitals where they're treated, they're detoxed, and they go through all of that, they feel they're doing all right, and then they leave, and where do they go? They go right back home. Sometimes it's right in the home where they used to use the drugs, or right in the neighborhood. They're the people who they use drugs with, the people, the places, and the things are all right there. And so the cues are too powerful. It's automatic response, and they return to using, and we get upset. And that's why, for those of you who are parents, it is probably not relevant right now, but I'm going to say it anyway. You can go tell some parent. If you know you have a child, a loved one, who is using drugs, you have to be attentive to the company they keep. Because if the company was a cue that prompted the use, if they keep in the same company, part of your treatment is problematic. And so, not every satisfied desire brings blessing from God. We need to focus. These people had come out of Egypt, and they were not delivered from the lusts of Egypt. Sometimes we need to be focused on the lusts that privately engulf us. We need to be focused on the lusts that privately engulf us. And so, we, by the grace of God, want to stay attentive to our God, because the God who gave the original diet in the Garden of Eden, probably there was a reason that it was a plant-based diet. Probably there was a reason that after sin, the animal component to diet came. Probably there's something instructive in the fact that Eve felt she lost control. She was not satiated, and she felt she had to take. Maybe there is something instructive in that for us. And finally, everything we do, or I should rather say the grace of God, could put our desires back in check. So as we work on some of the things we need to work on, please be reminded that God's grace is able to set us free and break us. And when this was over, the story said, many of them were buried there in the graves of lust. Graves of lust. Whatsoever we eat or drink, or whatsoever we do all to the glory of God, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 31. What is my point? It seems to me that finally they were consumed with doing things which were to glorify the self and not God. The lust was about the self and the satiation of the self. It was not about God. Jesus wants everything we do within our families to be for the glory of God. Dear God of heaven, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we are grateful to you for helping us to understand that you want us to live so that we can see you again in glory. When we see you, we want to bring to you such bodies, such lives, that we have allowed by your grace to season and transform. Bless us to this end, we pray in Jesus' name.